Monday. I hope you had a lovely weekend. So today I actually wanted to talk about what made me quit my corporate career after 20 years in IT, working in London and South Africa and literally all over the world, and embark on a business, on a mission really, to create a few businesses which I knew nothing about. And it's something I'm being often asked. I've done a lot of podcasts and radio shows, and I'm asked the same question over and over again, and I never really went into depth of it. So what I actually wanted to do, I wanted to create this mini series because it's so long. I can't expect anybody to listen to it because I could probably write a novel, seeing how many countries I've lived in and all these things I've experienced. But I wanted really to start today with part one and how it all started back in 1982. It's been so long. Just hoping that somebody who is feeling maybe stuck in their life, in their job, or with anything, can find some comforts in this and also just feel inspired to do something different. So I took some notes. I made some notes because having a completely open head and an open throat, and those of you who are familiar with human design perhaps will understand what I mean. But I collect all of these thoughts and ideas and experiences from the collective, wherever it comes from. And then I get confused. I don't know which ideas are mine, which thoughts are mine. And then I can't verbalize what actually matters. I try to solve everybody else's questions in my head. So that's why when I do something, longer than 2 minutes, I need to lay out notes in front of me. So if I look away, it's just because I'm just making sure that I'm not missing everything, as it will all make sense in the end. So that was housekeeping rules. And now I just want to transport you back into Russia, 1982. And I was about 5 years old then. Actually, I just turned 5. And I remember that I was sitting in a nursery and it was really dark, cold, freezing evening outside. And my dad was leaning over me trying to tie my shoelaces while I was crying. And I mean, that was quite unusual for me because I'm not a crybaby. I've never cried and I loved my nursery, even though only a few weeks later, I think I got expelled, but that's a different story. But what was happening, actually, I was watching TV, and on the TV, there was a funeral. There was a funeral of Brezhnev, who was our president at that time. And the reason I was crying, not because I loved him particularly, or was, dedicated to this, to the party or anything like that. But because I thought one day when I die, nobody will come to my funeral, that I wouldn't be as important, I wouldn't be as big, and I wouldn't have that, large, I guess, gathering. And in fact, already, since I was probably 3 or 4 years old, I was obsessed with Lenin. So he was another ruler of Russia whose body still lies mummified in Moscow, in Kremlin. And I thought that day to myself, if I can't be at least like Lenin, if I can't be mummified, then I would still be like Brezhnev, and I will gather a large crowd around me and I'll do something really, really meaningful with my life. So it was a really promise I made myself back in 83 or 82. And I still remember so many parents looking at me with this look of compassion on their faces, wondering, why, probably thinking what a great little communist I was, feeling so sorry for a president who just died, not realizing at all what was happening inside of me. So ever since that day, really, I became obsessed about the death and dying, and not so much as a fear of it, but what would happen to us after we die. So I got my hands on encyclopedia, and I was especially drawn to the Egyptian section, reading about the gods and the afterlife and the philosophy. So by the time I was 7, I was pretty well read, but I still had no answers to what happens to us when we die. Back then, I had a really, really strong connection to what now I understand to be the source. It was the sensation, the subtle feelings, the subtle nudges that I've experienced. And at times it was quite terrifying because the feeling would be so overwhelming. And especially on midnights, I was really scared. But often it was just this like big warm blanket around me. It was like home. It was a feeling that I don't think you can express in human words. So I remember once playing with a friend of mine in a nursery, and I told her I can make things disappear. Of course, I was talking biggest nonsense. So we took a like a first aid kit, and we put a couple of toys in there, maybe 3 or 4. And I said to her, once we open it again and I do my magic spell, the scissors would be gone. So we closed the box, I went abracadabra, whatever it was. And when we opened, there was no scissors. I still remember the look of shock on her face and my face. I think I was even more shocked than her. And also the teacher, he was standing next to me. We could not understand how that obviously was logically possible. So when I was 8, we moved to a different city and I was in a new school. And then I really focused on making friends, on trying to blend in and being like everyone else, because I didn't know anybody else who was interested in learning how to bend spoons with their mind, or hypnotizing people, or conjuring up gnomes, and in being interested in life after death. So I really was blending in and I was trying to make friends, and that sensation, that feeling of being home, this little nudges, this little nuggets, the something knowing has began to, to get less and less. Now, back in Russia, back in 1980s, and even I'm sure it's still now, it was very competitive. You had to excel in academics, you had to excel in sports and in music. And if you were not good at English, in maths and science, you were deemed as stupid. If you're not good in sports, you were lazy and fat, and you were laughed at. You would never get picked for any teams. And in music, if you didn't sing like Mariah Carey, you were told to shut up, pretty much. Somehow it happened that I wasn't good at sports. I was never picked for a team. I was always asked to sit on a bench. And music was even worse. I remember the teacher so many times telling me to be quiet and not to sing. Now, imagine what it does to a 6-year or 8, whatever, 9-year-old, when every single day, day after day, you're being told to be quiet while others can express themselves, can let it all out, the energy within them. You're the only one who's not allowed to do that. But that was back then. So I think, and that's what really had a big impact on my communication. I haven't been able to communicate over the years as sufficiently as I did when I was a child. So since about the age of 7, I was completely independent. I went to school on my own. I came home and I did my own lunch and dinners because my parents went off to work. And then they come home when it's late at night. And I remember when I was about 11, we lived in a city called Rostov-on-Don, and there was a cannibal on the loose. Literally, there was films made about him, and he used to prey on his victims where my parents worked, and where I used to play tennis. So the tennis lessons were cancelled, but obviously my parents still had to go off to work. We only were allowed to go to schools in the groups with like teachers or some friends. You're not allowed to go to school on your own, even though my school was like literally just outside my house. And then when I'd get home, I remember that I would just be glued to the window, waiting for the buses to come in, so for my parents to come home, as I was so terrified that they wouldn't make it home. And actually, my mom got very, very close to being hunted by that cannibal one day. But also, that's a separate story. And then on summer holidays, when I was sent to my parents. So my grandparents had a boat, and we would take the boats, and it would be my cousin and some of our different families, and we'd go on an island where we spend about 2 or 3 weeks. My grandfather was a hunter, so he'd go and hunt the ducks, and then me and my cousin would sit and we pluck them out and we cook stews, and it was really like authentic, very natural life. Back then I wasn't scared of rodents, so I was fine with mice too. And one day, and that's where it got quite interesting, one day I felt like it was just too much noise for me. I needed to get away from everything. I was about 9 or 10. I took a boat. It was a little wooden boat. And I pedaled to the middle of a river. The river was narrow, so I didn't pedal too far. And I lay in the bottom of the boat and I closed my eyes. And next then I had this visit. So back then I thought it was just my overactive imagination again. But now my memory came back, and the more kind of work I'm doing, the more clearing I'm doing, the more things are coming back to me. And that actually was the visit from current me to my younger self. Because I still remember lying in that boat and just basically that voice, I just instinctively, I knew it would be me in the future, but I just thought I was daydreaming. And that voice was telling me that one day I will have 2 children, a boy and a girl, check. I would live in a different country, check. I would travel the world, check. And I would really have a successful career. But the voice also told me that I must not blend in, and I must not try and be like everyone, and I must not please people. I must just be me. And that was not a check. And that's something, it took me probably more than 40 years to get to that. So, and I still remember, going back and telling my cousin what an amazing daydream I had, and we giggled and we kind of left it at that. And it was interesting because in one of the therapies, the regression I was doing, I just remembered it so vividly, and I knew then it was me talking to my younger self. So I'm actually wrapping up now. I've got just two more things that have really come to manifestation in my life. Back when I was a child, one of them actually I'm going to carry on in part 2 tomorrow, because it's got to do with a different country, with a different life. So just two more things to add here. The next really big thing was happening was that I used to love playing this game. And by the way, I was obsessed with World War II. Both my grandparents on both sides, they went through World War II. And my grandmother, she's Jewish. Well, she was Jewish. So they lived in Ukraine, which was occupied. And they had to, in the middle of the night, they had to run away from their home. They're basically running for their lives. One of the families that took them in, they decided, well, they changed their mind halfway through, and they actually wanted to give them up just because they needed some food for their own children. So luckily, my grandmother's mom, she woke up and she heard it. So they climbed out of the window, and I can't remember if there was a horse, but they managed to escape. So I've always been drawn to her stories. And every time I'd see my grandmother, I would ask her, to tell me the story about the World War II. So anyway, so one of my favorite games was to sit on a kitchen table and put all the dolls around me, and taking a piece of bread and just cutting into pieces and feeding every single one of them, savoring every bit, just reminding them that that's all we have to eat for foreseeable future. And I probably played this game over and over and over again so many times. And tomorrow when I do part 2 is called, it's about the Israel, because that was my next stop. I'm going to talk more about this story. And my second game I played is where I stood in front of the mirror, pretending to be speaking English, which I didn't speak at all back then. My mom thought it would not be useful for me, so she sent me to learn German instead, thinking that one day I will end up in Germany. Well, here I am now speaking English and not a word of German. So I remember I would be standing there in front of this big mirror and just talking away in gibberish, which to me this gibberish was English. And it's just something, I realized very recently after I read a book by Neville Goddard, how that manifested, how me having no clue back when I was 10, 11, that I will end up living in South Africa and England speaking only English. Anyways, it took me about 30 years to remember those games I've played, and also the visit from my future me to my younger me. And it's just incredible how things are uncovering more and more every single day. So that's the end of part 1. The part 2 is going to come tomorrow. I'm also going to upload this video to IGTV. And if you enjoyed it, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't enjoy it, you can still give me a thumbs up just because you can. Anyways, have a lovely day, and I hope to speak to you soon, or I hope to see you soon. Bye.